everyone, this is Heather. Thank you so much for joining me. Today I have a card tutorial for you using an adorable mermaid set from Whimsy Stamps. And I'm also using a stencil of theirs. So I'm going to be stenciling the front of the card. And then on the inside is this beautiful mermaid. I absolutely love this set. So I just thought it would be fun to have her kind of poking through a little opening with some seaweed on the front. So the stamp set that I'm using is called Let's Be Mermaids. And as always, I'm sorry for my overhead glare. There's the stunning mermaid, some great shells, seaweed, bubbles, little fish, and some really great sentiments. And today I'm going to be using the Let's Be Mermaid sentiment. I just love this set. I think this mermaid is just adorable. And then I'm also using their mermaid scale stencil. Let me move that out of the way so you can see it a little bit better. And this is a really intricately cut stencil that is really great for backgrounds. So what I'm using today is just a piece of blue cardstock that I've just cut, scored, and folded in half for the base of my card. And then I've got two pieces of 110-pound cardstock that are cut to 5 1/4 by 4. And I'm using a heavier weight cardstock just because, especially in the front panel, we're going to be putting a lot of liquid on the front. And then I've also just got a piece of computer paper just for scratch paper that I've cut in half. So the first thing that I want to do is take one of my pieces of the white cardstock and open up my cardstock base. And I want to temporarily tape it into place. So I'm going to leave just a little bit of a border, and I'm using just some repositionable tape. You could also use washi tape or low-tack tape. So I'm just taping that in place. And then I've got a circular die that's a little bit bigger than 2.5 inches in diameter. So I'm also going to temporarily tape that in place. And this one, I accidentally ran this through my die cut machine the wrong way, and it's a little bit warped, but it still cuts just fine. So I'm just going to kind of center this from side to side and up just a little bit higher than center. So now I have everything taped in place. I'm going to run this open through my Big Shot. That's really important. Make sure that you keep this open so that you're just cutting through those two top layers. So I'm going to die cut this and I'll be right back. So now I've die cut everything in my die cut machine and I've carefully removed the tape. I'm going to set these two circles off to the side. We're going to use them in a little bit. And I'm also going to set the cardstock base off. And I'm going to pull over a paper towel and a piece of scratch paper. And I'm going to lay my stencil down and use a little bit more of the repositionable tape. And I'm going to tape the stencil to that scratch paper. So I am using the Irresistible Spray Colored Texture Spray, and this is from Imagine Crafts, and this is an ink spray. It also has a little bit of like a glossy, kind of bumpy texture to it, so it's really great for these scales. And the color that I'm using is the New Sprout. So I've shaken it up a little bit, but just make sure that you shake these up really well before you use them. So I'm just going to shake it up and hold it back a few inches from your project and just give it some good sprays. So you can put as much coverage or as little as you would like, and it can be heavier in some sections, you know, and lighter in others. So now that I feel like I've got a good coverage of the spray, I'm going to carefully lift my stencil up and take a look at the piece that's been sprayed. So you want to go ahead and rinse your stencil off immediately. As long as you don't let the product dry on there, it should just rinse right off. And you can either let your cardstock air dry, or I'm actually going to use a low setting with my heat tool just to speed up the drying process. So next I want to emboss the words on the panel that I just stenciled on. So I've made sure that this is really, really dry, and I'm going to use a powder tool just to try and help make sure that we're not going to get a lot of flyaways for the embossing powder. Just kind of smooth that out a little bit. And I've already placed my paper and my stamp in a stamp positioning tool. And I've placed the stamp where I'd like it to be. And I'm just going to be using just clear Versamark embossing ink. And I'm going to ink up that stamp. Get that really nicely inked up. And press that down really, really well on there. And if I feel like I need to do it a second time, I can, but hopefully, and you won't be able to see this because it's completely clear, but hopefully I got a good amount of ink on there. I'm going to bring my embossing tray and some black detailed embossing powder over. And I'm just going to sprinkle that on where my words were, tap off the excess. And looks like I got a pretty good stamping on there. I'm just going to kind of flick the back a little bit. If you do feel like that you have some stray little bits of powder on there, you can take like a little paintbrush and just kind of brush away some of those powders. But it looks like I got a good impression, so now I'm going to go back to my heat gun and I'm going to heat emboss my letters. So now I have my nice shiny black embossed words on the front, and I'm just going to pour the rest of the powder back into my embossing container. And that's what's so great about these embossing trays, and you should be able to find these if you don't already have one at any craft store, stamp supply place. They're very, very handy for embossing powders. So now I'm going to go ahead and adhere this piece to the front of my card, and I'm going to put a generous amount of tape runner on here because this has had so much liquid and it's been bent by the heat gun and everything. I just want to make sure that it is going to stay put, and I'm just going to center that down, matching up the circle openings on my card front. And now I want to figure out where I want my mermaid to go. So again, I'm going to go back to this repositionable tape, and I'm going to tape my inside white piece of cardstock to the inside of my card. And then I'm going to grab my stamp. Whoops, flip her the right way first. Grab my stamp and just kind of figure out where I would like her to sit. And now I'm going to take a pencil and just make the tiniest little mark there at the top, where the top of her head would be, just so that I know she's going to be positioned pretty closely to where I would like her to be. I'm going to remove the tape. I'm going to put this in my stamp positioner and line her up with that little tick mark that I made. Close the lid. Whoops, actually I'm gonna put the magnets down first. Close the lid and pick her up carefully. And so now I know she's going to be about where I would like her to be. I'm going to take my eraser, erase that little pencil mark. No one will know that it's there. And I'm going to grab my black memento because I want to be using alcohol-based markers to color her in. And I'm going to ink her up and stamp her out. And I like using a stamp positioning tool. So sorry about that. I realized, of course, I got a smudge on my cardstock, so I had to stop and flip it over. And so anyway, so I'm going back to stamping her out. And like I said, she is large and detailed, so using a stamp positioner is a really great idea. That way I know if she doesn't stamp out exactly detailed enough that I can go in and add some more ink and stamp her out again and get a really nice crisp image. So I have stamped her out. I've got a good crisp image. I'm happy with that. And I'm going to bring one of the other pieces of scratch paper over. This doesn't need to be lined up perfectly, but she's in the stamp positioner, so I'll go ahead and do this. And I just need to lightly ink her up So I'm going to be using this scratch paper as a mask. So I just need a good outline of what she looks like. Get this out of the way. And now I'm going to take my scissors and cut out right on the edge of the scratch piece of paper. So I'm just going to very carefully cut out around, so I'm leaving the black edge and just carefully cutting around the entire stamp. And when I get to the center, I'm just going to pierce that opening there and just cut in with my scissors and get her entirely cut out for a mask. So I have cut out my mask, and I want to apply some adhesive to the back that is repositionable. So this is a Zig two-way glue pen. If you use it immediately after you've applied the glue, it's permanent. But if you let it dry, it becomes tacky and will allow you to reposition it like a sticky note. So I'm just going to apply the glue over the back of the mermaid mask that I've made, and I'm going to let that air dry. So I'm just going to set that off to the side while we continue to work. So I'm using the circle that I die cut out and the 2 pieces of seaweed, and back to my black Memento ink. And this is just a good way to use up the circles that you die cut. You could save them for another project, but I wanted them for the seaweed. So I'm stamping the 2 pieces of seaweed onto that white circle. And then I'm going to adhere the blue piece to the white piece. And the reason I did that was so that the inside of the card just looked a little bit more finished, rather than the backs of these being white and the alcohol ink coloring showing through. It just kind of helps blend it together. It just makes it look a little more polished and finished. So I'm just going to take my adhesive runner and just put a good amount on there, so when you cut them out, they'll be stuck together. I'm just going to line those up. So now I'm going to move on to some coloring, and I'm using alcohol-based markers from Spectrum Noir. You could use any coloring, medium that you would like. These just happen to kind of be some of the colors that I wanted to use on this project. So for her skin, I'm using FS2 and FS9. For her tail, I'm using DG2, CG2, which are greens, and then sort of a gray and a blue for the hair. So I've got BGT and TB2, which are kind of bluish gray colors. So I'm going to start off by doing her skin, and I won't bore you with me doing all of the coloring, but I'm just going to kind of go over the basics. So I just colored in the flesh tone all over with the lighter shade of peach. And then I'm going in with the pink color, which is more of a pinky, and just giving her some nice cheeks, adding some color to her lips, and then just a little bit of shading and shadowing. So I'm just doing this quickly. You can take your time. And if you want to go back in with that lighter color and blend it out, you could do that too. And then I'm using the lighter shade for the little starfish that's in her hair. So then I'm going to move on to the tail, and I wanted each of the scales to kind of be a different color. So just randomly do just, kind of a few groupings of the lighter shade of green here and there. And then I'll just go back in and fill in with the darker. And then on her tail, on her tail, just kind of followed along with the stamp and just did some stripes And again, just add a little bit here and there, and then I'm going to go in with the darker green. And just kind of fill in those spaces that didn't have the lighter green. So I have finished up with her tail and scales, and I'm going to use the same green colors on the seaweed. I'm just going to do the lighter color and just color the entire piece of seaweed with this lighter green. And then I'm going to go over top with the darker green, just kind of down the center, just to add a little bit more dimension to it. So now I'm ready to move on to her hair. So I'm using kind of a blue and a blue-gray. I'm going to go ahead and color in her bikini top. And I'm just, again, kind of following the lines of the stamp. I wanted her to have that kind of like trendy gray hair that's sort of like, you know, kind of a blue and silver. So I'm just layering those two colors together, and I'm going to go back over and do a little bit of blending. So I'm just kind of going back and forth with the blue and the gray color just to kind of blend them together, and I'm happy with the way that she looks. So I'm going to grab my mask and check and make sure that it's not feeling very wet, that it's just a little tacky. And I'm going to line up this mask over top of my colored image. And don't want to press down too hard, but just enough to make sure that it's not going to lift up. So I'm going to bring my kind of scratch paper back over here, and I want to do a little bit of inking with some Distress Oxide. So I'm using the Broken China Distress Oxide ink from Tim Holtz, and I'm using one of the little sponge applicators, and I'm going to just do a really light amount on there. And I like to start on the mask itself and kind of push outwards. That way, if I'm pushing at the mask, then I end up lifting up the edges of the mask. So if you kind of start off and swirl around. So I'm just kind of using a light pressure. Got a little bit too much ink there, but I can kind of blend that out. So either start off the edge of your cardstock and move in just a gentle swirling kind of motion. And I wanted it, you know, heavier in some parts and lighter in others. So I'm just going to continue inking this background, and I'll be right back. So I have finished up all my ink blending, so it's a little bit darker in places and a little lighter in others. I'm going to grab my Memento Black ink again, and I want to add some little fish swimming around in the background. So I'm going to have some kind of going off the edge. That's why I'm still on my scratch piece of paper. Then I'm going to turn it so some of them are swimming the other way. Just get a few little schools here and there. So I've got my little fish, and if you wanted to actually stamp some over top so it looked like they were behind her, that would work as well. So now comes the magic part where we peel off the mask, and you want to really carefully peel this off just so that none of that adhesive where we made our mask sticks to it. So very carefully peel it off, and you can see her start to emerge. And you can keep these masks and use them several times. If you make them out of a heavier weight cardstock, you could use them a lot of times, but this will stay sticky on the back for a while. So you can just keep that for next time. So now I've got my beautiful mermaid with the little fish swimming around, and I want to cut out my seaweed. So like I said, I've adhered that to the blue piece, and I'm just going to take my scissors and just cut around the seaweed and leave just a little bit of white space around it. So I have cut out my little pieces of seaweed, and now I'm ready to adhere my mermaid panel on the inside of my card. So I'm just going to put some adhesive on there and center her in. And now I'm going to figure out where I would like the seaweed to be. And kind of lift that up and put just a little bit of adhesive on the bottom of those pieces of seaweed. I'll try and leave those in place. Close the lid and push down so that they're adhered. And now we're finished with our mermaid card. I think she is so pretty. I love the shine and shimmer that texture spray gives, and just the little bit of scene that we've created with her sitting behind the seaweed. And so now it doesn't look quite as messy on the inside with the blue. So I hope you all enjoyed this card. I think she's really pretty. I will link to Whimsy Stamps website in the description box down below. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up and be sure to check out my channel. I've got lots of other card tutorials and product reviews for you, and I hope you have a magical mermaid day. This is Heather. Bye.